Hello everybody, welcome back to COM 230, another tech demo. This one is about using layers, and I'm going to show you two different ways that you can use layers. I'm not going to go into heavy detail. This is a pretty advanced technique. Most advanced graphic artists will use layers, but where most of you guys are right now, you may not want to use layers for doing your design work, but there is a little trick to using layers that can really help you as well. So I'm going to show you both standard use of layers and also the way in which you guys can make your lives a little bit easier by using a layer as a type of template. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is take you guys into Illustrator, and I pulled up a piece of sample art. Now you can get to this image if you're using CS5. If you're using CS4, you might want to look for a sample art called Cheshire Cat, and that's a really good one that I remember from CS4 using as an example. To get to your sample art, you go into File, Open, go to your application folder for Adobe Illustrator, and under Cool Extras, go through the English, go to Sample Files, Sample Art, and there's a whole selection here. The one that I've chosen to work with is this neuromuscular junction. It's a medical illustration, but this one seems to be pretty good for showing what I want you guys to see. There are a lot of others here, though, that you might just want to have a look and see how different people are working with Illustrator. Okay, so I've already opened this one. Okay, that's what this is here. And once you're looking at this, it looks like an incredibly complex image, and of course it is, but it's actually not as difficult to achieve something like this when you look at it broken down into components. Now you want to go into your layers tool here. If you don't see layers on your bar here, go to Windows and of course layers. Okay, do also check to make sure that your workspace is set up. I've customized mine, but Essentials is what most of you guys will be using. Okay, so I'm going to open up my layers palette, and this has all the different layers, and as you go through here you'll see there's 39 layers in here. And each element is on its own layer, and you can lock layers and you can turn them on and off with that little eye symbol on the left there, and you just kind of get a feel for how they've done this. Okay, they did a lot of little ones here. Some artists really like to use a lot of tiny layers like this. I tend to build more heavily on each individual layer when I'm working, but it's really a matter of taste, so you can kind of play with it and see how you like working with it. I know a couple students in class are already working with layers, and that's great because it's a really it's an advanced technique that's really powerful, and most professional designers, again, do work with layers. Okay, so this is where things start getting a little bit easier to see. You can see a miniature representation of what is on that layer. And if you go over to the little eye symbol, you can toggle layers on and off. So you can see how that changes the image when I turn that layer off or back on. But they do each individual item in layers. And this is just another way of rearranging your layers. Instead of using the Arrange tool to get things to move on top or below to each other, if each element is on its own layer, you can move these layers around. And I'll show you that in just a moment. Okay, but you start getting a feel for just how simple this image really is when you start turning off all these little layers. You see this one, this is just a single line. You see this line going up here? This is what they call the nerve cell main, and it's just a single line. That's the only item on this entire layer. Okay, but you can start getting a feel for this anyway. But I do encourage you guys to have a look at layers and open up a piece of sample art. If not this one, then you can look at another one. Some of them are a little easier to see how people worked with layers. Others are a little more difficult, but they are all here. Okay, so this is layers. Now I want to show you how you guys can work with layers. So I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to open up a new document, just a standard size document this time. Alright, and earlier before I started the demo, I went online to Google and I did a search for a mermaid illustration. I use the word illustration because I don't want a photograph, or I guess it would be a photograph of a person, of course, not a real mermaid. But it is an illustration. You may also want to put line drawing or refine your results to image and to line drawing or a contour drawing. That way you'll get the most simple drawing possible. So I've brought up a couple here, and I want to show you both of these. Now, a lot of people do have difficulty drawing freehand in Illustrator. If you don't have a high degree of drawing skill, you may find this really difficult, but there are a couple tricks that you can use to make things a little simpler to you. The first thing I want to show you is how a really simple illustration can actually be quite rather nice. Okay, this is a mermaid illustration, but it is really, really simple. Okay, it's only a couple lines. Her arm is defined, her torso, her fin is defined with just these really simple lines. You don't have to get really detailed on your illustrations if you just go with a contour drawing such as this one. It's very, very simple, and there's nothing wrong with this for a lot of different types of logos and a lot of different illustration types that you're doing. It may not work for every design, it may not work for every company or client that you're working with, but certainly for some of them it can work. Okay, so don't be afraid to go really simple like this. It actually is a nice clean logo for something. Okay, so I just wanted to show you this one really quick. We're going to go back to this in another demo that I want to show you. Okay, the next one I want to open up, and I'm using file place here, you might notice too. Okay, I'm going to go to another illustration of a mermaid. I'm going to resize that. I want to keep my proportions right, so I'm going to do it over here. Okay, so this is my mermaid illustration. Okay, now this automatically shows up in layer 1, and for the most part you guys have only been working with a single layer, so you've only been working on layer 1. Okay, for this one I'm going to leave this on layer 1, but I'm also going to come up here and I'm going to drop the opacity down so that it's really quite light, and I'm going to use this as a template for drawing something. Okay, and then I'm going to come down to my layers palette. I'm going to lock that layer so that I don't adjust it. Then I'm going to add a new layer or create new layer. Okay. Now whichever layer is highlighted in blue, that's the one that you're working with. Okay, now this is not highlighted and I've also locked it. And I can toggle it on and off if I want to. Okay, but on layer 2 is where I'm going to actually be doing my drawing. So if you guys are trying to create a figure such as this, or an object like a chair or a phone or something like that, this is one way in which you can achieve this. Now this is copyright infringement unless you make this illustration your own in some form. You have to personalize this image so that it is your own. You can't just outright steal from somebody else. We're not allowed to do that, even in a class setting. Alright, so I've zoomed in just a little bit, and I'm going to go to my pencil tool, and I'm just going to I'm going to show you a couple different things here. When you first open up your pencil tool options, it probably looks 1, 0, keep selected, edit selected, and within 12 pixels. This is kind of the standard. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how it works in here. I'm going to use my pencil tool, and I'm just going to trace. Now, depending on the type of mouse that you're using, you might find this easier or harder. I find using a trackpad like I'm using pretty difficult. I have an easier time with certain other types of mouse. I really like the rollerball mouses. Nice. Okay. Alright, so you can see that I've traced the outline of the fin. Now this is pretty ragged. Okay, the edges are pretty ragged, and there's an awful lot of points in here that I really do not need. Okay, so I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to go back into my pencil settings, and I'm going to adjust my fidelity and my smoothness. And then I'm going to try it again. Okay, notice I have a hard time keeping a nice, smooth, even line. And you probably will too, unless you have a lot more control over your mouse than what I have. Okay. I'm going to make her a little fluffier. Looks a little anemic to me. I have a 4-year-old daughter who adores mermaids, so I'm trying to reinforce a little bit here. Okay, but you see how this is a much smoother line. It's a much smoother path. It holds mostly to the shape that I've outlined. I'd need to clean it up here a little bit, and I probably wouldn't even put this ragged edge. It would be one way in which I can personalize this image to be my own. It is important that you do that. It's okay to use other people's work as a template, just to get the general outline of the object that you're trying to build, but you do need to make sure that it is your own work by the time that you finish. But you see how really quite simple that was? And I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to eliminate these right now. There you go. Just simplify that down a little bit. I'll have to adjust that afterwards as well. And for this one, I might do her upper body separate. That's pretty ragged. Okay, but it does give me the general shape that I need, and I can work on the rest of that. Now keep in mind that you can't just use a line here and a line here and then lines here. If you need to be able to build these as objects. So I'm going to build my next object here. Really ragged. Okay, and I'm looking at the colors that I might be using. Whoops, I'll have to change that in a sec. Because I have that selected still, and my settings in my box were to keep selected and edit selected paths within 12 pixels, it erased my previous line. I'd have to either adjust these or have this unselected or not selected in order to do this. Let's try that again. There we go. That might not have followed my contours quite as much, so I might actually need to add a point here. I can fine-tune that a little bit later as well. And I don't have to worry about getting all my lines perfect at this stage because I will be editing it. And you'll also have to remember that these shells are going to be placed over the body marks. Okay, so again, that's something else I won't have to worry about too much. Now where you see these points are not joined, you will also need to join those points. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. If you don't have a closed shape, such as for here and here, if you don't have these as closed shapes, then you won't be able to fill it with a color. I also might need to do the same thing here. So I'm going to use my direct selection tool. I'm going to select my anchor points. First the one, hold down my shift key. I'm going to select my second anchor point. I can go to Object, Object, Path, Join. And it will join those together. Now you may not need both of those anchor points, so at that point you can simply delete one of your anchor points. Okay? But you will need to do this for any of your shapes that are not closed shapes. You must have closed shapes if you want to fill them. That's Object, Path, and Join. Okay, you have to play with that a little bit. Okay, it's going to take some fine-tuning here too, but it is a lot quicker to do it this way for some instances. You can also use the keyboard equivalent, which is, in the case of a Mac, it's Command J, which is a little bit quicker as well. Okay. All right, let me zoom out and give you guys a feel for what we're doing. Okay, so you can see we're getting close to the shape that we want to achieve here. And for her hair, I'm going to do the general shape of her hair. Whoops. I'm going to do the general shape of her hair, and then I can always add in these separate lines. These are just lines. You don't have to worry about making these filled shapes. But I can do the general shape of her hair and the general shape of her crown, but then add in these brush marks. Okay. Okay, again, you don't want anything selected unless you're joining to it. Really rough there, but I can fix that. Okay, got the basic shape of her hair. Basic shape of crown. Okay, so this is very rough, but you get a feel for it. I'm going to turn this layer off. Okay, but you can see we have the basic shapes of this mermaid that we can work with. Now I can start fine-tuning my shapes. I can add the lines that I might need for the little shell bra top, for the hair, for the face, the fin. All these things will need a little bit of refining. But these are now shapes that I can manipulate, and I can add color to, and whatever else I need to do. Okay. Anyway, hopefully this will help you guys get to where you want to be when you're drawing your illustrations for your logos for both this week and for the rest of the semester. Okay, and on the next demo, I'm also going to show using the Live Trace tool, which is another little trick that you can use for sometimes achieving something like this. And I'll show you another method. It's a little bit less controllable than this is, but it might be more useful to you in certain situations.